The show ended. The cameras stopped rolling, but nobody seemed ready to leave. Usually, the moment the taping finished, audience members would rush out eager to beat the traffic or get on with their evening. Not tonight. People lingered in their seats, still talking to the strangers around them, still processing what they'd witnessed. Some were exchanging phone numbers, promising to stay in touch. Others were just sitting quietly, lost in their own thoughts. Backstage, Will and Keanu stood together for a few minutes, continuing their conversation away from the cameras. The production assistants who normally rushed guests along seemed to sense this wasn't the time to hurry anyone. Will was asking Keanu questions about grief, about finding purpose, about staying grounded. Keanu was listening as much as he was talking, nodding along as Will shared some of his own struggles with fame and pressure and the constant need to stay relevant. Before they parted ways, Will pulled out his phone. "Can I get your number? Not for business stuff, just if I need to talk to someone who gets it." Keanu smiled and they exchanged information. Two colleagues becoming something closer to friends in the span of an hour-long interview. Within hours of the show airing, something unprecedented started happening online. Usually, talk show clips that go viral are the funny moments, the celebrity gossip, the awkward exchanges. But the clip that started spreading across every social media platform was the serious part. The moment when Keanu opened up about loss, the look on Will's face when he realized the depth of what he'd been joking about, the embrace between them. On Twitter, the video was being shared thousands of times per hour. People weren't just mindlessly retweeting it. They were adding their own stories. A teacher wrote about how she'd lost her husband and was learning to live again. A veteran talked about losing friends and finding purpose in service. A single mother described raising her kids after her partner died unexpectedly. The comment section became this unexpected space of collective grief and healing. YouTube videos of the interview were getting millions of views. But more remarkably, the comment section wasn't the usual toxic wasteland. People were being kind to each other, sharing resources for grief counseling, offering words of encouragement to strangers, thanking Keanu for his honesty and Will for his genuine reaction. One comment that got thousands of likes read, "I've been a fan of both these guys for years, but I've never respected them more than I do right now. This is what we need more of. Real conversations about real things." Another person wrote, "I was having the worst day. Just got laid off feeling worthless. Then I watched this and realized my problems are temporary, but the connections we make with people are what last. Going to call my sister who I haven't talked to in months." The impact rippled outward in ways nobody could have predicted.
Mental health hotlines reported an uptick in calls but not crisis calls.
People were calling to talk about their grief, to process their losses, to ask for help in healthy ways. Grief counselors started seeing more clients who'd been inspired by the interview to finally address trauma they'd been carrying for years. A nonprofit organization that Keanu had quietly supported for years suddenly got flooded with donations. People who'd watched the interview wanted to honor what he'd shared by helping others. The organization's director gave an interview saying they'd received more in 1 week than they usually got in 6 months. Will posted something on his social media a few days later. It was unusual for him because it wasn't promotional, wasn't funny, wasn't trying to sell anything. He wrote, "Had a conversation last week that changed my perspective on a lot of things. Sometimes the universe puts someone in your path exactly when you need them. Grateful for the reminder that success is meaningless if we're not connecting with each other on a human level. Going to try to be better about what matters." The post got millions of likes, but more importantly, it sparked conversations. Other celebrities started sharing their own experiences with loss and vulnerability. A famous athlete talked about his depression. A beloved actress opened up about her miscarriage. It was like Keanu and Will's exchange had given people permission to be honest about pain. Teachers started using the interview in their classrooms, talking with students about empathy, about dealing with loss, about what really matters in life. Philosophy professors showed it as an example of stoic wisdom applied to modern life. Business schools discussed it in the context of authentic leadership and values-based decision-making. A high school student wrote an essay that went viral about how watching the interview made her realize she'd been bullying a classmate who was dealing with the death of a parent. She apologized publicly and started a kindness initiative at her school. Her essay ended with, "Keanu was right. Everyone is fighting a battle we know nothing about. I'm going to try to remember that." The interview also sparked discussions about celebrity culture and what we value as a society. Think pieces were written about how we worship wealth and luxury, but what really moves us is authenticity and compassion. Podcasts devoted entire episodes to analyzing why the moment resonated so deeply with so many people. Some critics tried to be cynical about it, suggesting it was all planned for publicity. But anyone who watched the actual exchange could see the genuine emotion, the real vulnerability. You can't fake that kind of authentic human connection. Mental health advocates praised both men for normalizing conversations about grief and loss. When someone as beloved as Keanu Reeves talks openly about his pain, one psychologist wrote, it gives millions of people permission to acknowledge their own. And when someone as successful as Will Smith shows genuine emotion and humility, it breaks down the stigma around men expressing feelings. Months later, people were still talking about it. At coffee shops and dinner tables, in therapy sessions and support groups, the interview kept coming up. Did you see that Keanu Reeves interview? Became a common conversation starter, and it would lead to deep discussions about loss, meaning, and purpose. Keanu himself stayed characteristically humble about the whole thing. When asked about it in a later interview, he simply said, I just answered a question. I'm glad if it helped people, but I was just being honest about my experience. We all have experiences. Mine aren't more important than anyone else's. But they had impacted people. Suicide prevention organizations reported that several people had called their hotlines specifically mentioning the interview as a reason they decided to reach out for help instead of giving up. If Keanu Reeves can lose that much and still find purpose and kindness, one caller said, maybe I can too. Will incorporated what he'd learned into his work. He started a foundation focused on grief support for families, particularly those who'd lost children. He became more selective about his projects, choosing films that meant something to him rather than just chasing box office numbers. People who worked with him noticed a change, a depth that hadn't been there before. The two actors stayed in touch. They'd text occasionally, meet for coffee when they were in the same city. It wasn't a performative friendship for the cameras. It was real, built on that moment of genuine connection they'd shared on television. A year after the interview, a journalist asked Will about the moment that had defined his career. Everyone expected him to talk about one of his blockbuster films or award wins. Instead, he said, the moment Keanu Reeves taught me what really matters. That interview changed me more than any role I've ever played. The clip of their exchange became one of those pieces of media that people return to when they need it. During tough times, loss, uncertainty, people would watch it again, finding comfort in Keanu's wisdom and Will's authentic reaction. It became a touchstone for how public figures could use their platform for good, for real connection rather than just entertainment. Support groups started using it as a discussion starter. Therapists recommended it to clients working through grief. Parents showed it to their teenagers to teach empathy. It transcended being just a viral moment and became something more lasting and meaningful. The production crew from that night's show talked about it for years afterward. The cameras had captured something rare, they all agreed. A moment of genuine human connection, unscripted and real. The kind of thing that reminds you why you got into television in the first place. Not for the laughs or the ratings, but for those occasional moments when something true breaks through all the artifice. What started as Will Smith playfully teasing Keanu Reeves about riding the subway had become a cultural moment that sparked conversations about grief, purpose, compassion, and what it means to live a meaningful life. It reminded millions of people that beneath the celebrity, the wealth, the fame, we're all just human beings trying to make sense of this complicated, painful, beautiful experience of being alive. And maybe that was the real lesson. Not that we should all give away our money or ride motorcycles or eat sandwiches on benches, but that we should be authentic, be kind, be present with our pain and our joy, and remember that every person we meet is carrying something heavy. The question isn't whether we'll face loss and hardship. We all will. The question is what we'll do with it, how we'll let it shape us, and whether we'll use our experience to bring more light into the world or more darkness. Keanu had chosen light, and in sharing that choice with honesty and vulnerability, he'd helped countless others see that they could choose it too. That's the kind of impact that lasts long after the cameras stop rolling and the applause fades away. That's the kind of moment that actually changes people. And it all happened because two very different men sat down for what was supposed to be a simple interview and ended up having a conversation that millions of people desperately needed to hear. Will Smith sat there, and for maybe the first time in the entire interview, He was completely still. No gestures, no animated expressions, no quick comeback. He just sat there looking at Keanu with an expression that was hard to read at first. Then you could see it, recognition, understanding, and something deeper. Something like respect mixed with genuine emotion. His eyes had gotten glossy, the way they do when you're trying to hold back tears in public. He blinked a few times, took a breath, and when he spoke, his voice was different. Gone was the entertainer's bravado, the performer's polish. What came out was raw and real. "Man," Will said quietly, almost whispering. "I'm sorry." Keanu shook his head gently. "You don't need to apologize." "No, I do," Will insisted, leaning forward. "I was making jokes, being playful, and I had no idea. I didn't know what you'd been through. I didn't understand where all this came from." He gestured vaguely, trying to find the right words. "I feel like I just walked into church wearing a clown costume." A few people in the audience let out small, sympathetic laughs at that, the kind of laughter that comes from tension needing release. But mostly people were quiet, watching this moment unfold between two people who, minutes ago, had seemed so different, but were now connecting on a profoundly human level. The host, clearly moved himself, finally found his voice. "Keanu, thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of people needed to hear it." Keanu nodded, still calm, still centered. "We all go through things. Everybody in this room, everybody watching at home. Loss is universal. Pain is universal. The question is what we do with it." Will was nodding along, really taking in what Keanu was saying. You could see him processing it, connecting it to his own life, his own experiences. "You're right," Will said. "You're absolutely right. I've been so caught up in success, in building this empire, and making sure I stay on top. And don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for all of it. But when you put it like that, when you talk about what really matters..." He trailed off, emotional. The audience waited. Will gathered himself and continued. "I lost people too. We all have. And you're right that no amount of money or success brings them back or fills that space." He looked at Keanu with genuine admiration. "But I don't know if I've dealt with it the way you have. I think I just kept moving, kept working, kept building, because if I stopped, I'd have to feel it all." The honesty in the room was staggering. Two of the biggest movie stars in the world, sitting on a talk show couch, having the kind of conversation most people only have with their closest friends at 3 a.m. Keanu reached over and put his hand on Will's shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it carried weight. There's no right way to deal with grief. Everyone finds their own path. I'm not saying my way is better. It's just what works for me. "But it is better," someone in the audience called out, then immediately looked embarrassed for speaking up. But Keanu smiled at them, not upset at all. "I appreciate that," Keanu said, addressing the audience member directly. "But the point isn't to compare. The point is to be authentic to yourself and kind to others. That's it. That's the whole thing." The host, sensing this was a pivotal moment in television history, asked a question that many viewers at home were probably thinking. How do you stay so grounded when you've been through so much? A lot of people who experience that kind of loss become bitter or angry. Keanu thought about this for a moment. "I think I did go through anger. I definitely went through the bitterness phase. But eventually I realized that holding on to that was like drinking poison and expecting someone else to get sick. The only person it was hurting was me." Will was listening intently, hanging on every word. Other celebrities in similar situations might have pulled out their phones or zoned out. But Will was completely present, completely engaged. "And I had a choice," Keanu continued. "I could let the loss define me in a negative way, or I could let it teach me something. I could become closed off and protective, or I could become more open and compassionate because I know how much suffering there is in the world." He paused, looking around the room. "Every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. That stranger on the subway might have just lost their job or gotten a scary diagnosis or said goodbye to someone they love. When you keep that in mind, it changes how you interact with the world." The audience was completely absorbed. People had stopped checking their phones. The usual rustling and fidgeting that happens in a studio audience had ceased entirely. Everyone was just listening. Will wiped his eyes, not embarrassed about the tears anymore. "You just put into words something I've been feeling but couldn't express. This whole time I've been chasing the next level, the next achievement, trying to prove something. But prove it to who? For what? You've achieved incredible things," Keanu said genuinely. "Your success isn't meaningless. You've brought joy to millions of people. You've worked hard and earned everything you have. There's no shame in that. But you're making me think about what's next, Will said. Not the next movie or the next business deal. But what's next for me as a human being? How do I want to show up in the world? The host jumped in. I think this is something a lot of successful people struggle with. When you've checked all the boxes society tells you to check, when you've achieved the dream, then what? Then you figure out what your dream actually is, Keanu said. Not society's dream for you, not what you think you're supposed to want, but what actually makes you feel alive and connected and purposeful. A woman in the audience raised her hand tentatively. The host, seeing an opportunity for genuine interaction, nodded at her. I just want to say, she started, her voice shaky with emotion. I lost my mom last year and I've been struggling with how to move forward. Hearing you talk about this, about choosing compassion over bitterness, that really helps. Thank you. Keanu looked directly at her, his expression full of genuine care. I'm sorry for your loss. And I promise you, it does get easier. Not better, necessarily. You don't get over it. But you learn to carry it differently. The woman nodded, crying now, and the people sitting next to her put their arms around her. Throughout the studio, you could see people wiping their eyes, comforting each other, having their own moments of recognition and release. Will stood up and walked over to Keanu, extending his hand. Keanu stood too, and instead of a handshake, Will pulled him into a genuine embrace. It wasn't a Hollywood hug, the kind they do for cameras. It was real. Two men connecting over shared humanity and pain and the journey of trying to be better. When they separated, Will kept his hand on Keanu's shoulder. Thank you, brother, really, I needed to hear this today. I didn't know I needed it, but I did. We all need reminders sometimes, Keanu said with a small smile. I need them too. This isn't me having it all figured out. I'm still learning, still growing, still making mistakes. The host, who'd been in the business for over a decade and had interviewed hundreds of celebrities, looked genuinely moved. I have to say, in all my years doing this show, I've never had a conversation quite like this one. This is special. The audience erupted in applause, but it wasn't the usual enthusiastic TV audience applause. It was slower, more thoughtful, more meaningful. People were standing up, some still crying, all of them recognizing they'd witnessed something rare and real. Will turned to the audience. You know what? I came here tonight to promote a movie and crack some jokes, and instead I got a life lesson from this man right here. He gestured to Keanu. That's the universe telling me to pay attention. Keanu laughed, a bit embarrassed by all the attention. I just answered a question honestly. I didn't mean to turn this into a therapy session. But that's exactly what people need, the host said. Real conversations. Honest emotions. Not everything polished and perfect and pre-planned. This right here, this is what connects us. As the interview wrapped up and went to commercial break, something remarkable happened. The audience didn't immediately start chattering or checking their phones. People sat quietly, processing what they'd just witnessed. Strangers in the audience were talking to each other, sharing their own stories of loss and resilience. The crew members were standing around in small groups, having hushed conversations about their own experiences. What had started as a typical celebrity interview had transformed into something much bigger. It had become a moment of collective recognition that beneath all the fame and success and surface-level differences, we're all just human beings trying to make sense of life and loss and meaning. It started innocently enough, the way these things usually do. The host had just asked Keanu about his latest project, and Keanu was giving his typical thoughtful, understated response. He talked about the work, the crew, the process, without ever really focusing on himself. It was classic Keanu, deflecting attention away from his own contributions and shining the spotlight on everyone else involved in making the movie. Will was listening, nodding along, but you could see that playful energy building up inside him. He shifted in his seat, leaned forward a bit, and when Keanu finished talking, Will jumped in with that big, infectious grin of his. He looked at Keanu, then at the host, then back at Keanu, and you could just tell he was about to say something. Man, I gotta ask you something, Will said, his voice full of friendly curiosity mixed with amusement. I've been hearing these stories about you for years, and I just gotta know if they're true. The audience leaned in. Keanu just smiled politely, waiting to hear what was coming. The host looked interested too, probably hoping for some good television. Will continued, gesturing with his hands the way he does when he's really getting into a story. So I hear you take the subway. Like the actual subway, the train with regular people going to work and everything. Is that real? Keanu nodded, still calm. Yeah, sometimes. It's a good way to get around the city. The audience made a collective sound of surprise and delight. Will's eyes went wide in exaggerated disbelief. The subway. My man, you're worth how many millions and you're riding the subway? He turned to the audience, spreading his arms. Can you believe this? The audience laughed, and Will was just getting started. He had found his thread, and now he was going to pull it. And I heard you gave away millions of dollars from the Matrix movies. Just gave it away to the costume designers and special effects people. Who does that? Keanu shrugged, a little embarrassed by the attention. They did amazing work. They deserved it. They deserved it, Will repeated, shaking his head in amazement. This man right here just casually gave away enough money to buy a small island, and he's like, they deserved it. He slapped his knee, laughing. Meanwhile, I'm over here negotiating for extra back-end points. The audience roared with laughter. The host was grinning, sensing this was turning into something special. Will was on a roll now, and there was no stopping him. He wasn't being mean, not at all. It was the kind of teasing you'd do to a friend. Poking fun, but with genuine affection underneath. And the motorcycle thing, Will continued, pointing at Keanu. You rode here on a motorcycle tonight, right? Not in some fancy car with a driver. Not in an SUV with tinted windows. A motorcycle. In LA traffic. Keanu was starting to laugh a little now, shaking his head at Will's theatrics. It's not that big a deal. Not that big a deal? Will's voice went up an octave. Man, I've got 3 cars just to drive me to different things. I've got a car for premieres, a car for casual Fridays, a car for when I'm feeling nostalgic. The audience was eating it up, laughing at every word. And you're out here like some regular guy just riding through traffic on 2 wheels. The host jumped in, clearly enjoying this. I've also heard you eat at diners. Like regular diners where normal people eat breakfast. Will threw his hands up. See, this is what I'm talking about. He looked at Keanu with mock concern. Brother, are you okay? Do you need someone to show you how to be rich properly? Because I can help you with that. I can teach you. Keanu was fully laughing now. A genuine, from-the-belly laugh that you didn't see from him often in public. But he still wasn't saying much, just letting Will do his thing. And Will was definitely doing his thing. I saw a picture of you on the internet, Will said. Sitting on a bench eating a sandwich by yourself. Just a regular sandwich, probably from some corner store. And people were losing their minds. Look, it's Keanu eating a sandwich. He's so humble. He's so down to earth. Will mimicked people taking photos. And I'm thinking if someone caught me eating a sandwich on a bench, my publicist would have a heart attack. The whole studio was laughing now, including the crew members who were supposed to be working. Will had transformed what could have been a standard interview into a comedy show, with Keanu as his unwitting co-star. Let me tell you what my day looks like, Will said, settling into his story. I wake up in a bed that probably costs more than most cars. I've got people who bring me breakfast. I've got a personal trainer, a chef, a guy whose only job is to make sure my sneakers match my outfit. He counted on his fingers as he went. I've got assistants with assistants. And you know what I did last week? I spent 20 minutes deciding which private jet to take to New York. 20 minutes. He paused for effect, then pointed at Keanu. And this man right here is probably deciding which subway line to take. Should I take the red line or the blue line? That's his big decision. Keanu was shaking his head, smiling, but also looking like he was trying to figure out where Will was going with all this. The host was practically glowing, knowing this segment was going to be gold for ratings. Will kept going. And the charity thing, man. I donate to charity, don't get me wrong. But I've got financial advisors who plan it all out, tax people who make sure it works out right, publicists who announce it at the perfect time. He looked at Keanu seriously. You just give money away like you're handing out Halloween candy. No press releases, no photo ops, just, here you go, hope this helps. The audience applauded at this, clearly appreciating Keanu's approach even as Will was teasing him about it. Will joined in the applause, still grinning. I read that you bought motorcycles for your entire stunt team on one movie, Will said. Motorcycles, plural. For the whole team. He turned to the audience again. You know what I bought my stunt team? A thank you card. A really nice one, though. Had a ribbon and everything. More laughter filled the studio. Keanu was being a good sport about it all, laughing along, occasionally trying to downplay what Will was saying, but not really defending himself either. It was like he understood that Will was just having fun, and he was content to let him have it. Will stood up at one point, too energized to stay seated. Can we talk about the fact that this man turns down roles all the time? Not because the money isn't good enough, but because he doesn't want to be away from home too much. Do you know how many movies I've done just because they offered me a ridiculous amount of money? He paused. Okay, don't answer that. My agent might be watching. The host was trying to steer things back to something resembling a normal interview, but Will was in his element. I just want to understand the psychology here, he said, sitting back down but still animated. You've got all this success, all this money, all this fame. You could literally do anything you want. You could buy anything, go anywhere, live however you want, and you choose to live like, he searched for the words, like a really successful philosophy teacher or something. Keanu finally spoke up a bit more. I just don't need all that stuff, you know? It doesn't make me happy. Will looked at him like he'd just spoken in a foreign language. It doesn't make you happy? Have you tried being rich in a fun way? Because I'm telling you, it's pretty great. He was playing it up for laughs, but there was also genuine curiosity in his voice. What about a yacht? Have you tried owning a yacht? Because that's pretty enjoyable, I'm not gonna lie. I don't want a yacht, Keanu said simply. He doesn't want a yacht, Will repeated to the audience in disbelief. The man doesn't want a yacht. I've got friends who own multiple yachts, and they're not even as successful as you. The energy in the room was incredible. Everyone was having a great time. The laughter was genuine, and Will was masterfully walking that line between friendly teasing and actually making a point. But underneath all the jokes and exaggeration, you could sense something else brewing. The way Keanu was sitting there, quiet and patient, letting Will have his fun but also seeming to be gathering his thoughts about something. The host, sensing maybe it was time to give Keanu a chance to respond properly, asked him directly, Keanu, how do you respond to all this? Why do you live the way you do? And that's when the atmosphere in the room began to shift. The studio was buzzing with that electric energy you only get when something special is about to happen. Camera operators were adjusting their equipment, sound technicians were doing final checks, and the audience members were settling into their seats with excited whispers filling the air. This wasn't just another Tuesday night taping. Tonight, two of Hollywood's biggest names were going to share the same stage, and everyone in that room could feel something memorable was brewing. Will Smith walked onto the set like he owned the place. And honestly, after decades in the entertainment business, he kind of did. His presence alone seemed to brighten the room. He had that natural charm that made everyone around him feel at ease, like they were hanging out with an old friend rather than watching one of the most successful actors in movie history. He was wearing a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and his smile was as bright as the studio lights overhead. The host greeted him with a warm handshake and that professional enthusiasm that talk show hosts have perfected over the years. They exchanged some quick banter before the cameras even started rolling. Will was already cracking jokes, making the crew laugh, and generally being the life of the party. This was his element. He'd been doing this kind of thing since he was a young rapper from Philadelphia. And now, all these years later, he could work a room better than almost anyone in the business. The interview started off exactly how you'd expect. They talked about Will's latest movie, some action-packed blockbuster that had just hit theaters the week before. Will told funny stories from the set, imitated some of his co-stars in that way he does, and had the audience laughing at every punchline. He was animated, using his whole body to tell stories, jumping up from the couch at one point to demonstrate a stunt he'd performed. This was vintage Will Smith, the entertainer who'd been making people smile for over 30 years. But then the host mentioned that they had another guest joining them shortly. The audience perked up even more if that was possible. When the name Keanu Reeves was announced, you could hear the collective gasp of excitement ripple through the crowd. Now this was going to be interesting. Will and Keanu together on the same couch, two completely different personalities, two different approaches to fame, two different ways of moving through the world. There was a commercial break, and during that time, you could see Will chatting casually with the host, completely relaxed and in his zone. The makeup artist rushed out to do touch-ups, assistants brought water, and the energy in the studio somehow managed to ratchet up another notch. The audience was practically vibrating with anticipation. Then Keanu walked in, and it was like watching a completely different kind of movie star enter the room. Where Will was all flash and energy, Keanu was quiet and almost understated. He wasn't trying to command attention. He just moved through the space with this calm, centered presence that somehow drew your eye anyway. He was wearing much simpler clothes, nothing flashy, just well-fitted jeans and a dark jacket. His hair was a bit tousled, like he'd just taken off a motorcycle helmet, which, as it turned out, he actually had. The host mentioned this, asking Keanu about his ride to the studio, and Keanu just smiled that gentle smile of his and said he'd ridden his motorcycle over. Nothing fancy, no limousine, no entourage, just him and his bike navigating through the city traffic, like any regular person would. The audience loved this, and you could see Will's eyes light up with amusement. Here was a guy worth millions who could afford any luxury imaginable, and he chose to ride a motorcycle through Los Angeles traffic to get to a television interview. When Keanu sat down on the couch next to Will, the contrast between them was something you could almost reach out and touch. Will was leaning forward, gesturing as he talked, filling every moment with words and energy. Keanu sat back, relaxed but attentive, speaking only when he had something to say, and even then his words were measured and thoughtful. It wasn't that he was uncomfortable or shy. He just didn't feel the need to fill every silence with noise. The conversation started flowing naturally. The host asked them both about their experiences in action movies, and Will jumped right in with another funny story. Keanu listened with genuine interest, laughing at the right moments, nodding along. When it was his turn to speak, he offered his thoughts quietly, without any of the showmanship that Will brought to his answers. It wasn't better or worse, just different. Two actors at the top of their game, but with completely different approaches to their craft and their public personas. The audience was eating it up. There's something fascinating about watching two people who are so different interact in real time. It's like watching different elements come together. Will was fire, warm and energetic and impossible to ignore. Keanu was water, cool and calm and deep. And somehow, sitting there together on that couch, they created this interesting dynamic that kept everyone watching completely engaged. Will seemed almost fascinated by Keanu. You could see it in the way he looked at him when Keanu spoke, like he was trying to figure out what made this guy tick. Here they were, both actors who'd achieved incredible success, both beloved by millions of fans around the world, but they'd gotten there in such wildly different ways. Will had built his career on charisma and personality, on being larger than life. Keanu had built his on being almost the opposite, on being humble and grounded and real in a way that seemed almost impossible in Hollywood. The studio audience was loving every minute of it. There were fans of both actors scattered throughout the crowd, and you could hear different groups reacting to different moments. When Will told a joke, some people would laugh loudly. When Keanu said something quietly profound, a different set of people would murmur in appreciation. It was like watching two different concerts happening at the same time, somehow creating this harmonious blend of reactions. The host was doing a great job of keeping the conversation moving, asking questions that brought out the best in both of them. But you could sense something building in the air. Will had that look in his eye, that mischievous glint that people who knew him well would recognize. He was cooking up something, getting ready to have a little fun, and Keanu, sitting there calmly beside him, had no idea what was coming. The stage was set. The cameras were rolling. The audience was fully invested. Two of Hollywood's biggest stars were sitting side by side, representing two completely different approaches to fame and success. What happened next would turn a simple talk show appearance into something that millions of people would be talking about for days, weeks, even months to come. Sometimes the best television moments aren't planned. Sometimes they just happen when you put the right people together and let things unfold naturally. And this was about to be one of those moments.